being a fairly large category here as well. So we're going to talk about this when we look at the data just for Guyana. But remember this so we can see what the differences are. Next slide. Main substance impacting treatment, marijuana, crack, alcohol, and cocaine in that order if we take all of the countries taken together. So marijuana is the biggest driver of persons looking for treatment in the region. This is a very interesting statistic. All right? Very, very interesting. Even more than alcohol. Next slide. Age of first use. I won't spend too much time on this, but the most productive years in schooling here, 10 to 19, and then when you start to work are the ones that are most impacted by problematic drug use. Next slide. This slide basically asks you whether you've ever been treated before. All right? And for the persons in the region, you can see that 45% of them were previously treated. All right? And 48% of them were first-time persons. So you have a large proportion of this population who revolve in and out of the treatment system. This is normal. This is nothing otherworldly. Treatment is a process of starts and fits and stops for many, many people. You're lucky if you go in once, you're clean, and you're clean for the rest of your life. Most of the time, it's, it's a cycle. So this is nothing, out there or crazy. Next slide. We can skip this one. This is just the types of treatment available, residential, outpatient, etc. Next. This is another important question, completion of treatment. Basically, we ask the participants who would have been treated before, did you complete that treatment program? All right? And 37% of them said no. And only 25% of them said yes. And there was a huge category here, no response. Even if we split this in two, put half in no and half in yes, there's still a larger proportion of persons who would have said, no, we didn't complete the program. So again, when I said earlier that this doesn't allow us to evaluate treatment itself, but it's something we need to discuss at some point in time. I think it's, the more data we see, the more we're convinced that we need to look more closely at how we can work to support the services being offered, not just in Guyana, but across the Caribbean. I don't think that enough support is being provided for those services. Next. We also had some questions on criminal justice interaction and mental health. So if you look at just arrest history, lifetime history, have you ever been arrested? Yes, 48%. So almost half of the people who seek treatment at a treatment center have had some interaction with the criminal justice system. That's another important variable to take note of. You have to know the population that you're dealing with. All right? Next slide. Another question, this was a self-report, so we didn't have a test or anything to verify it. But we asked persons to tell us whether you were ever diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder before, and about 21%, this is all of the countries taken together, 21% of the respondents said, yes, I was previously diagnosed with some type of psychiatric disorder. If you're interested in this actual disorder that they mentioned, we also have that information that we can share with you as well. Next slide. Placement after treatment, we can skip that. And these are just a few of the conclusions from what the regional picture in 2015 showed us. The main substances impacting treatment was marijuana, crack, and alcohol in that order. All right? Vast majority of persons were males. Most persons started using as teenagers marijuana, those who were seeking help. And 45% of the persons seeking treatment would have been treated before. All right? Next slide. Now, let's focus on Guyana. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Okay, so let's look at the clients. This looks pretty familiar, right? This is almost exactly the same as if you look at the regional picture. The regional picture, I think, was like 80-something, 88%. So it's almost the same here in Guyana. Next. Ethnicity. Remember the picture we saw for the regional presentation was very different to this one. You can see here, in the case of Guyana, no surprises. The largest category of persons in terms of ethnicity were East Indian, 40%, closely followed by African. They're virtually the same here. And then the rest are mixed. And there's also a small group, 4.6% of indigenous people. And this, I think, is pretty important here for Guyana because of where indigenous people live, access to services, and other reasons. I think this is, even though this is small, I think this is reflected in what Mr. Henry presented in terms of binging by region. Did you remember that? The regions that did the binging? I think there's a relationship between all these things. Next slide. Marital status, most of them are single, just like the regional picture. Next. This is almost exactly the same. We had a few deportees, just 9.2% of the persons in Guyana were deported at some point in time. There's a feeling by some people that deportation and deportees have a big impact on certain social characteristics of a country. We can have that discussion. I'm not sure how much of an impact they have, but people think they impact crime, they impact the types of drugs being used, the type of crime and things like that. But here in Guyana, 10% of the persons who sought treatment were deported. If you're interested, we can take out just those people and do an analysis of them compared to the rest of the group to see what the major characteristics are in terms of those two groups, looking at them separately. Next. Age range, virtually the same as the regional picture, so no surprises here. Next. Level of education, the only difference here is that the largest category for the regional picture was complete secondary. Here it is incomplete secondary in Guyana, so 41% would have not completed their secondary schooling, and you have 33%. These figures were more or less reversed for the regional picture, if you remember. Next slide. Employment status, very, very similar. Most persons are working, self-employed, working or self-employed. Next. And now this is where things look a little different. Remember in the regional picture we had encouragement from friends, which was like 40-something%. Then we had self-referral, which was about 20-something%. And then health system and justice system. Here in Guyana, the source of referral to treatment is by far encouragement from friends or family members. This says two things, at least two things to me. One, it is good that people are looking out for their friends and family and getting them to help. But two, on a more negative note, it suggests that the level of interaction between treatment or the facilities or the community that provides treatment and other important sectors like justice and health, that the relationship there is not as strong as it should be. All right, so this is an important thing to pay attention to. In countries, for example, like Barbados, where I'm from, and other places like Trinidad and Tobago, this category, referral from the justice system, is quite high. One, in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, they have a drug treatment court. So they funnel people into treatment where it is appropriate. In the case of Barbados, even before they had set up their drug treatment court, there was an understanding among the magistracy and judges that there is a relationship between what some people do and their drug habits. So depending on the individual cases, magistrates would routinely send people for treatment rather than incarcerating them. But that was not a law, it was not a regulation, it was a practice that developed over time. But this is an important slide that shows that there may be a disconnect between treatment and these other important social services. Again, this is what the data is telling us. Main substance impacting treatment here in Guyana was crack, then cannabis, and alcohol. Now, what we're not sure of is if this is all crack or a combination of crack and cocaine. All right? I guess you can let me know whether, but this is the information we got. We're just reporting the information that we received. But I have my questions about whether this is all crack. But this is the distribution of the main substance impacting treatment. Remember, in the regional case, it was marijuana, which was the substance that was impacting treatment the most. But crack here is like 43%. That's fairly high. Next. Again, this is very similar to the regional picture. 56% of the persons in treatment were first-timers. This figure was around 48%, I think, for the regional picture. So again, it's a revolving door. Nothing spectacular about this. Next slide. We can skip this. Sorry, let's go back. Completion status. Again, here in Guyana, 36% of persons who were previously treated did not complete the treatment program. All right, only 7% did. 7.89%. All right, next slide. Again, this is lifetime treatment history. Very, very similar pattern here next. I think you're going backward there. There we go. All right. Lifetime arrest. Were you ever arrested in your lifetime? All right. More than 2/3 of those in Guyana seeking treatment were arrested at some point in their life. All right. Interestingly, when we asked about were you arrested in this past year, sometime in 2015, 70% said yes. All right. Next. Let's see. History of diagnosed psychiatric disorder. Very, very similar to the regional picture. The regional picture, the figure here was 21%, if my memory serves me. So it's a little bit higher here in Guyana in terms of the number of persons who were previously diagnosed with some psychiatric disorder. Next. This is placement after treatment. Next. And what I also did, what I added to these slides was the the information that Mr. Henry would have presented. This is the audit test, alcohol use disorders identification test. This basically asks everyone who would have said, yes, I used alcohol in the past year, a number of questions. And based on the responses to those questions, you can score those individuals on the level of risk or problematic use of alcohol. So as you can see, the vast majority of persons, only 68%, were low-risk users, 21% were moderate, and 5% were high. And let me tell you a little bit more about what those things mean. Low, when you see low here, that's low risk of harm from alcohol use. Moderate risk means that there is a moderate risk of harm and there are some respondents who are already experiencing some harmful effects from alcohol. High risk means that if they continue to use the way they're using, it will definitely result in harm, if not already doing so. And here, these are persons who are probably and most likely addicted, dependent on alcohol. Next. Demand for treatment. So if you look at this slide, 1.8% received treatment, 0.7% in the past year, 3.2% felt the need. And if we go to the previous slide, if we go back to the previous slide, and we see that there's 6% who are actually dependent, meaning that in theory they need treatment. We can see there's a gap between the need for treatment and the persons who are actually receiving it. All right? Next slide. Next. And these are the same reasons that Mr. Henry gave you before. Next. So in conclusion, for the 87 persons on which we got data in 2015, the majority were male, of course. The mean age was 33.8. The youngest was 13. The oldest was 58. The vast majority were in that productive age range, 20 to 29 and 10 to 19. Main substance that was driving the demand for treatment was crack, by 43.6%, marijuana, around 30%, and alcohol, 24%. And most persons, 89%, 87.36%, sorry, were encouraged to seek treatment by family and friends. Next. 56% of those seeking treatment were first-timers. The rest would have been treated multiple times. It appears that there's not a lot of interaction between criminal justice, other healthcare agencies, and those that provide treatment in terms of referrals. Of course, as in other countries, this is nothing peculiar to Guyana. Persons who are in treatment have a relationship with the criminal justice system in some way. All right? The actual numbers and percentages vary, but in every country, this is a characteristic of that population. It's important to know. Mental health is an issue that we need to get on top of, I think. And most persons were placed into some sort of outpatient program. Next. And that's it from us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chairman Michael Atherley. And look, I want to ask you to give another round of applause to both Clement and Purnell for that piece of education that I just got there. And you, of course, too. Mr. Jean Domio, our OS representative, CICAD representative, Mr. Clark, His Excellency Perry Holloway, of course, Clement, members of the Diplomatic Corps, and I see some senior government officials and unit heads here, friends all. I want to immediately thank the OS and the Inter-American Drug Abuse Commission for their fine work in sponsoring this 2016 Household Drug Survey in Guyana. This comes after a major survey of drug use among secondary school students was launched in 2015. Drug use among households across the country is a most welcome piece of information any country should want. These cold, hard facts about the state of our households as it relates to those households' use of licit and illicit drugs, tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, among others, as we saw, tells a worrying story. Behind these statistics, too, we will come to know what we have become and what we can do about it. I have been fortunate to get this preview of the findings of the survey from Michael Atherley. I think it's about a week now. And with Michael's permission, I wanted to state some of these findings. Now, these were repeated by some previous speakers, but stating them makes me feel so disheartened, in a sense. The objective, as we know, in relation to this survey, were to determine the prevalence of these psychoactive substances in our households in Guyana and to see what patterns of use were being put to them. And these findings include, and I'm glad that they shared around a set of a brochure there that stated these. Almost 41% believe that it's easy to access marijuana. No, that's telling us plenty. Almost 20% of the respondents believe that it is easy to access cocaine. 65% believe that the drug has increased in Guyana in the past years. 46% of the respondents believe that drug use will get worse in the coming years. 56% believe that the drug use issue is among the core concern of government, while 92% of respondents indicated that they do not know of any drug awareness or prevention programs in their neighborhoods. And then, of course, alcohol binge drinking among current users are as high as in males, 64% and over, and in females, 46.3%. And of course, the lifetime prevalence, as mentioned by Clement, and the use of alcohol and tobacco and marijuana over the year and over the month. And then there is also a kind of a geographic portrayal of what respondents say in Region 3. 21% of them said that there's a great deal of drug dealing in their neighborhoods. And that also goes for Region 7, where 24.5% of the respondents therein said that great deal of drug dealing in their neighborhoods. My intention here is not to create a moral panic, but in all honesty, and I wish to repeat the words I used at the school survey launch, these statistics paint a picture which shames us all. It's an outrage, and we have to do something about it. These troubling statistics are corroborated by what our traffic chief recently informed me about. Already from that period, 1st to 15th of January 2017, as compared to 1st to 15th of January 2016, cases made out of driving under the influence of alcohol tripled. Last year, 2016, there was 89 for that period. It is now 228 in early 2017. It does some damage to your, sense of caring and all of that. But I want to also mention a couple of things about the links between drugs and violence, and the fact that there is definitely a link, and the fact that we have seen how excessively Guyanese drink and use marijuana and use tobacco and all of that. It shows a development that will be extraordinarily negative. Drugs misuse and violence both act as a catalyst for each other. Studies show that drug consumption is linked to drug abuse and delinquency and antisocial behavior in adulthood and educational failure. Not only does drug use affect physical and cognitive functions, but it also contributes to reduced physical control and the ability to recognize warning signs in potentially dangerous situations, which can make some drinkers easy targets for perpetrators of criminal acts. Additionally, individuals' expectancies and societal beliefs about the effects of drugs, that is, we found them there, increased confidence and increased aggression, can mean that drug is consumed as a preparation for violence. Victims